He's saying here that there's people who are embarrassed to say to a sick person at his deathbed to make a will, resolve his matters. And then the person dies while he has people's rights due, so then he's punishable for that. And then among his inheritors, there's a massive quarrel. That thing happens, he says, in which there's no good, and then the majority of the wealth goes to, he says, the government, to the rulers. Today I would say in many of these cases, there are big, wealthy families who have lost 20, 30, 40, maybe 50% or more of their wealth to the lawyers on both sides. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa baraka wa sallama tasliman kathiran ila yawmiddin amma ba'd. In the last point that we covered in the last session was Imam Sha'rani was encouraging. He's saying that another right of one brother over the other is that he helped him in getting married. Because marriage is half of your deen, as we know. Marriage is extremely important. And for many people, marriage is what gives them that additional comfort in life that they so desire. Marriage is a very natural phenomenon. To have a person you can be close to and share your emotions with, and just have somebody that you can get together with each day. That is relationship, is that kind of emotion is generally fulfilled through marriage. It's a very natural human emotion, a human requirement, a human need. And if we are able to help somebody do that, if you help somebody buy a house, it's a great reward. You help somebody buy a car, that's a great reward. You help somebody come out of some difficulty, it's a great reward. If you help somebody get married, the benefits of that are never ending. Because for the rest of their life, inshallah, if the marriage succeeds, then you reap the benefits of that. They get children from that, so you keep reaping the benefits of that until the progeny continues. So there's huge benefits in helping somebody get married. Huge benefits. A lot of the time, because of certain cultural reasons or cultural blowbacks, what I mean by that is, in all good faith, genuine desire to see good, you recommended somebody to someone and something went wrong. You didn't know. You had no idea. The two just couldn't get along together for whatever reason. It wasn't done with any intent of mischief. One is that somebody's involved somewhere else and you try to. A lot of parents do this. When they find out their child is involved in a haram relationship, they try to go and make them sit down and force them into a halal relationship, thinking that that's going to break the haram relationship, and it doesn't. It spoils the other person as well. But genuinely somebody tried and then it didn't work out. And what people do is that they will then blame you. Oh, you're the one who brought this person to us. You're the one who made this recommendation. What that does is actually stops people from making recommendations because they think something might happen. I'd rather stay silent. And that's wrong as well. So it's all bad akhlaq that stops all of these kind of common ways of assisting each other, mutual assistance. He's going to deal with some of these things. Anyway, so that's the benefit that you get in helping your brother get married. It's a right of one brother over the other to do that. The next point, the new point here is وَمِنْ حَقِّ الْأَخِ عَلَى الْأَخِ أَلَّا يَغْفُلَ عَنْ عِيَادَتِهِ إِذَا مَرِضَ وَلَا عَنْ خِدْمَتِهِ لَا سِيَّمَا فِي اللَّيْلِ. If your friend, your associate, your companion, somebody you know becomes sick, your Muslim brother becomes sick, becomes ill, then do not become heedless of visiting them. Make sure that you visit them. Do not miss that out. That's the time they really need you most. And that's the time when you do something, it will count a lot. It will bring much more satisfaction to visit somebody when they're sick than it does probably when they're not sick, because it means a lot more at that time. So definitely a person should not be heedless about this, especially when they're sick. And even at that time, the other thing one person should be very considerate about is to serve them, to fulfill their needs, because at that time they're in a more vulnerable situation. They may be in need of some kind of shopping, some kind of purchase, something like that, or whatever the case may be. That's why he says, especially at night time, because in the daytime sometimes people feel better. At night time generally sicknesses get worse. It's just the nature of sickness, nature of illness. You feel worse at night than you do in the daytime. The darkness has something to do about it, right? Unless a person is a wali of Allah, they look for the night to pray, to have intimacy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the majority of people, they'll probably feel much more enlightened in the daytime, because the sun, it helps. Brightness helps. Drudge weather brings about a miserable kind of reaction in people anyway. So especially, la siyama fil layl, especially if it's at night time, that's the time when they really need your help most. So be prepared to help them and serve them at night time as well with their needs. That's why it mentions in a hadith that he relates here. He says that in a hadith he mentions ما من رجل يعود مريضا ممسيا إلا خرج معه 70,000 ملك. Anybody who visits a sick person at night, in the evening, any person who visits a sick person in the evening, with him go out along with him 70,000 angels that make istighfar for him, that seek forgiveness for him until the morning. And whoever goes and visits in the morning, then 70,000 angels will seek forgiveness, come out and seek forgiveness for him until the evening. Hadith is related by Imam Abu Dawud from Ali radiallahu anhu, and there's others who've narrated it as well. One thing he mentions after this though, he says وَيَنْبَغِي لِلْعَائِدِ أَلَّا يَأْكُلَ عِنْدَ الْمَرِيضِ. For the person who's visiting the sick person, it is inappropriate to stay behind for eating, to go and eat at their house as well. He says, it mentions in a hadith, إِذَا عَادَ أَحَدُكُمْ مَرِيضًا فَلَا يَأْكُلْ عِنْدَهُ شَيْءٍ. Anybody who visits a sick person, don't eat anything there. Hadith is related in Musnad al-Firdaus from Abu Umama radiyallahu anhu. This obviously just talks about a dislike, and it's understandable, it's reasonable, that if the person is sick, for them to prepare food for you, you might say, well, how long does it take to eat? It's not about that. When you prepare food for somebody, if it's as simple as just plonking something down in front of you and here, eat, it's not like that, is it? It's not a shop that has everything, workers in place, and you just have to give them a package or something like that. This preparation has to be done. You have to get the right kind of plates, you have to lay down something, you have to set it up, you have to make sure you have, in the way we do it, it's not just about one dish, it has to be a few things. There's a lot of effort and formality that goes behind it. It's not just a simple dish that you put in front of somebody. Otherwise, you have this fear that people will make fun of you, that all they gave me was one dish of rice, right? Or one dish of soup, or a bowl of soup or something like that. Generally people require all these other weird little things to, they're the kind of side marginalia, as we call it, right? To go with it. So that's why all of that formality, you'll be forcing them into that formality, so just refuse to eat. However, if it is a person, for example, you're very close to, family members for example, you've gone to your father's house, he's sick, your son's house, and there's other people there who can do all of that formality and it's completely fine, then it's not a hard and fast rule that you cannot eat. It's not haram, let's put it that way. It's just disliked, it's discouraged. Let's put it that way, it's discouraged because of the difficulty that it will entail the person or his family. But if it's not, and they're fine with it, and they insist that you eat, and they will actually feel bad if you don't, they'll take it as an offense, then in that case it'd be probably better to eat with them. So again, you just have to play it according to the situation. In fact, it says that generally, if a person understands the adab of visiting, the sunnah adab of visiting, they'd have no time to eat. The sunnah adab of visiting the sick is purely there to make the person feel good. You go in, you do that, you don't sit around, and that's all you do, and then you leave. It's just about making them feel good, making them feel cared for, somebody cares for you, and then you leave. There's no time to sit around and make the host or make their family feel obliged that they must offer you something. Because generally people don't immediately bring in food or something to eat. They wait for a while and then they bring it. Just on a side point, sometimes you go to visit somebody and you want to visit 5 people that day. That's your visiting day, because people are very restricted in their terms of their time. So you want to visit 5 different families. When you go there, they want you to stay there for 2 hours. And they say like, why'd you come for half an hour? You shouldn't have come at all. I said, okay, fine, I won't come then. Generally what I say is I thank Allah that I've even been able to come for half an hour. I need to leave. So what they do is they just sit and talk to you for half an hour, right? And then after, when you say, I need to leave, they say, oh, but you haven't had anything. Then you go into the kitchen and spend another 45 minutes in bringing you something. So I know that the best visits that I have are people who are, mashallah, understand your situation. They suss it out right from the beginning. Right? And there's certain ulama that you visit who are like this as well. They completely understand. They will ask you, how long do you have? And based on that, they will do everything that's the best kind of host. Hospitality, right, has to be done according to the comfort of the guest. So don't insist on things that will unnecessarily inconvenience them. Visiting should be made easy, especially in this time and age when visiting somebody is so difficult. So if it does happen, then make it a good experience. Make it easy. And that's why, as a host, you should try to understand how much time these people have, and don't insist on beyond that, because the person genuinely may not have time and you may discourage them in the future. So these are all different things, but there's no hard and fast rule to any of this. It just has to be done according to what is best at that point, while keeping the main adab in consideration. Right. The next point he brings, we're talking about somebody you're visiting the sick. So with that, he's got another point. He says, وَمِنْ حَقِّ الْأَخِي عَلَى الْأَخِي أَنْ يُرْشِدَهُ إِلَى الْوَصِيَّةِ إِذَا حَضَرَتْهُ الْوَفَاةِ ولا يتبع الحياء الطبيعي في ذلك والفائدة في ذلك معلومة. You can tell that Imam Sha'rani must have been consulted by many different people. He must have gone and dealt with numerous situations, cultural problems, social problems, and thus all of that is what enriches this book of his. So he says that another right of one brother over the other is that he should encourage him, guide him to write a will if he is about to die, or if he is in his final days. Then he should encourage him to write a will. That's a very difficult thing to do, because encouraging somebody to write a will gives a signal that you expect them to die. And that seems to be contrary to what people think you should be doing at the time. You should be giving people hope. You shouldn't be expressing the idea that they die. I find it very difficult to respond to those kind of questions. You get questions for dua. You get requests for dua, by email or something. My grandmother's in hospital, the doctors have said this, that and the other. They'll make it totally extreme, and it probably is an extreme situation. Can you make dua for her recovery? And you make dua for the recovery, but my dua generally is that may Allah give her ease. May Allah give her ease. May Allah give her recovery. May Allah give her ease. Because sometimes there's people who fight. There's a person who's has many problems. Many organs have failed. And the doctors have said there's not really much of a chance. But what the hospital can do, a lot of the time, they can intervene by just keeping the heart pumping or the brain alive somehow. But the life is generally going to be a miserable one, because it has been for the last 5 years or 7 years. They've just been in constant pain. But people think it's their religious obligation to do everything to force the hospital and the doctors to keep the machines on. And that's not the case. That's artificial. At the end of the day, that's artificial. The only thing in Sharia that you cannot do is to deprive somebody of basic nutrients. That means food and water. That's something you cannot stop. But as long as they're getting that, however they're getting that, whether through a drip or any other system, medication, therapy, artificial intervention of that nature is not necessary, and a person should not feel guilty. Yes, if there's a likelihood and a chance, then yes, do it. But if the doctors are telling you it doesn't seem likely and you're just hoping for a miracle, then sometimes it's better that you let the person to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he wants to give him recovery, he can give it to him without intervention. So it just, in that situation, it becomes very difficult for some people. So there's a lot of conflicting emotions at that time. So one of the conflicting emotions is the cultural reason for just giving somebody hope. Not speaking about death. Not speaking about death whatsoever. So what should you do? Well, there's a religious obligation here that this person, rather religious obligation, there's a religious recommendation here that a person should write a will. Especially in this country, it's very important. In Muslim countries or in countries where they will just go and distribute the wealth according to the Islamic shares, then it's mustahab in that case. It's just a recommendation in that case to write a will, because it's going to be dealt with properly anyway. But in this country, it's more of an obligation, because generally what happens is that the court will not distribute according to Sharia. They will distribute according to half goes to the remaining surviving partner first, and then after that it goes in equal shares to the children, and then there's 40% that goes to the government. Inheritance tax, big oppressive tax, that is, very oppressive, 40%. And the reason why it's oppressive, I say that is oppressive, is because in London, if your house is worth £1 million, for example, then and there's one surviving partner, how do you sell the house to pay the 40? How do you pay 400,000? How do you pay 400,000? Well, obviously, I mean, there's a relief because of the surviving partner and so on. But for some people who's got 2 houses maybe, or additional commercial property or something like that, you'll have to sell it to pay 40% off. That means sometimes the house is sold as well to pay it off. So are you really better off with a high price, with an elevated price of your home? You're not really going to sell your home and go anywhere. So what's the point of a high price? You know, for most people, my house is worth £1 million, they say. What are you going to do with it? You're still living in that house. You don't want to move out of the city. So what are you going to do with that house? So these are just all dunyawi. These are just various dunyawi deceptions that we're dealing with. So in this case, the natural cultural reaction would be don't say anything, whereas the dini recommendation is that write a will, do something. Although in this country, writing a will at the last moment, you can't save yourself from inheritance tax. 7 years have to pass before death for you to get that relief. Anyway, I'm not a lawyer here. This is not the point here. But these are things that you need to look at. The main thing for a deceased person is he should be encouraged to do something to try to do something that will prevent any kind of quarreling after he dies, in terms of what he leaves for his family members. That is what the most important thing is. Resolve your issues. Don't die leaving a fire raging behind you. Sometimes that's not possible. There's a case that I was dealing with in which a mother is trying to leave the equal shares for her children before she passes away, so that there's no problem after it. But they are creating a problem while she's still alive and disagreeing, refusing to accept what she's giving them, because they think, or at least 1 or 2 think they'll get more if she dies without distribution. And her life is miserable, literally. They're not even letting her die in peace just because of the wealth. So she has this situation where she wants to die leaving it in peace, but in trying to distribute it beforehand, it's causing her great agony and great misery. So these are just weird things that you work in this world, that happen in this world. Allah help us all. Allah help us all. So in this case, don't worry about what social says. Encourage them. Maybe don't do it in public, but encourage them. Make them do tawbah. That's another thing. Tell them to repent. Tell them to maybe seek forgiveness from others. At the end of the day, if they do die, they will thank you in another life. They will probably thank you, because if they have sought forgiveness for excesses they've committed of people, family members and others, maybe outstanding debts or outstanding other rights, whatever it may have been, or maybe solving the issue of the family and the inheritance, they will thank you, and everybody else, maybe other people will thank you as well. And at the end of the day, you do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's your right for this brother to do this. It's your right. So Allah will reward you even if others do not appreciate it. Of course, just do it in a way that will mitigate the harms, if there's any harms perceived. Imam Sha'rani says something very interesting, which totally applies to today. He says, استحيا أقوام من قولهم للمريض أوصي فمات وحقوق الناس عليه ووقع بين ورثته ما لا خير فيه وذهب أكثر التركة للحكام. He's saying here that there's people who are embarrassed to say to a sick person at his deathbed to make a will, resolve his matters. And then the person dies while he has people's rights due, so then he's punishable for that. And then among his inheritors, there's a massive quarrel. That thing happens, he says, in which there's no good, and then the majority of the wealth goes to, he says, the government, to the rulers. Today I would say in many of these cases, there are big, wealthy families who have lost 20, 30, 40, maybe 50% or more of their wealth to the lawyers on both sides. So you've got this very wealthy family, huge assets. I haven't seen it as much in this country yet because we're still not there yet, but it's happening. It's started to happen. Talking about other countries where 3 generations of 4 generations, 5 generations, wealthy people, and minimum 20, 30 to 40, 50, maybe even more of the wealth of that family has been lost to lawyers on both sides. So the family is kind of split in half, or sometimes there's 5 people on this side and the rest of the whole tribe on this side, and huge amounts of money are made by the lawyers in between. Now, if they could have just thought, look, this is going to take 5 years. This is what masjids do as well sometimes. When committees fight with each other, they spend 60, 70,000 on each side, masjid money sometimes, and they don't get anything out of it. Right? This masjid, I think, is a good example of that, or a bad example of that. Right? So, alhamdulillah, there's stability now. Alhamdulillah. I'm not stroking any politics here, okay? I was just mentioning it as a reality so other people can benefit, inshallah. It's not worth it. You'd rather think, look, I'm going to do this, so how much money we think we're going to waste in the next 5 years doing this? The agony, the grief, the problem, the expenses. Come on, man, let's just split that in half. Or you take that much. I'm going to spend that much anyway, you take that much. Khalas, let's just do it. Mufti Shafi Uthmani, when he first started working in Karachi, he was among other people, he was with some other people, and they had bought a place to establish a madrasa or something. And in one of their initial meetings, there's some quarrel came up about whatever. So Mufti Shafi Sahab, Mufti Taqi's father, rahimahullah, he decided to just walk away. He says, if this is what it's going to create, my whole purpose of this is to do it for the sake of Allah, but if this is the kind of quarrel it's going to create, I want nothing of it. He was one of the main people in that project who had secured this location and put a lot of effort behind it. He walked away from it. A lot of people said, what are you doing? But he said, no, there's no pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this. He walked away. Just within a year, he had the whole of Korangi, Darul Karachi, that whole entire estate, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him something better. Initially he started off somewhere else apparently. So to walk away from a quarrel, the Prophet ﷺ said, anybody who walks away from a quarrel and avoids it, if he's wrong, he should walk away anyway. He's wrong anyway. But still, because it's such a heated moment and emotions get the better of you, the Prophet ﷺ provides an incentive here. That even if you're wrong and you walk away from it, you still get a place in Jannah. Not in the highest levels of Jannah, but you get a place in Jannah for that. You get a special place in Jannah for that. And if you are right and you walk away from it, which is even more difficult to do, right? Because in the first case you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. But still to give an incentive. And the Prophet ﷺ is taking people's emotions in mind, because this is a very heated emotion, especially when you have to defend yourself. But if you are right and you still walk away from it, you get a house in the highest levels of Jannah. And this is what Mufti Shafi Sahib had in mind. So he walked away from that. He got that place in Jannah, the high level in Jannah. And then within the next year, he also got the whole plot of land as well. So he walked away with both a plot of land in this world, a high plot of land in this world, and one in the Akhirah as well. He had to have done this on trust. You didn't know that you were going to get something next year, did you? It was purely for the one in Jannah. But Allah also gave a reflection of it in this world. That's the kind of thought process that needs to be in our minds. Then things will work out. May Allah give us that tawfiq. Then the next point he mentions, again on the same theme that somebody is sick. وَمِنْ حَقِّ الْأَخِي عَلَى الْأَخِي أَنْ يُسْهِرَ عِنْدَهُ إِلَى الصَّبَاحِ إِذَا كَانَ فِي حَالَةٍ تفضي إلى الموت فربما كان الأجل في ذلك الوقت فيفارقه على وفائه بحقه. Now you are seeing that these may be final moments. Now one thing you must remember, that if somebody becomes extremely ill and it seems to indicate the last moments, then they suddenly seem to get better. That's a very deceptive moment. It happens to many, many people. They seem to get better. They get this kind of new lease of life for a few hours or a few days, and then it goes again. Death is a very strange thing. And a person who's in a end state, it's very difficult to understand such a person. We can only understand it from the experiences of what we've seen. For example, one person that I know whose mother was who was from Medina Munawwara originally, he was in America, but his parents were in Medina Munawwara. His mother was sick and they took her to Jeddah despite her protest to a hospital, because in Medina the hospital wasn't that great. And she just wanted to get back. Finally, when the doctors released her and they were on their way back, she kept asking, are we in Medina? Are we in Medina? Are we in Medina Munawwara? And they kept saying, no, no, no. It's about a 4 or 5 hour car drive. When they finally got into the limits of Medina Munawwara, and they told her yes, that's when she died. Now, how does a person do that? Allah knows best. It's a very, very particular, very peculiar experience. My mother, rahimahullah, when she was in hospital, bad cancer had really spread everywhere. And she was in hospital, but she was very uncomfortable. And then she just started saying one thing: take me home, take me home, take me home. She's telling my brother this, and then she tells me this. And, we were hoping they could do something in hospital. That's why the whole conflict there's a whole emotional conflict going on here. That she's saying that, but we think it's better for her to be in the hospital because they think they can do better for her. Finally, this was very peculiar. That she was saying, take me home, take me home. And finally we said, okay, khalas, let's. So we managed to get a release, took her home. And that's it. After that she didn't speak. And the next day she passed away. So she just wanted to die at home. And Allah gave her that. So how do they do that? It's like, how do people do this at that death time? It's very interesting. We can only know if we experience it. But then you can't experience it because you'd have to die after it. And people at that state don't generally write books or mention their experiences. It's a kind of a very strange moment when a person is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anyway, he says that when you see that final moment, then it is a right of one brother over the other that you should spend the night with them until the morning. If you see that final moment, especially if you think their state is finally going to end in death, because it's very possible that the death may be written at night, and it would be then very good that they depart from this world with you by their side, having fulfilled, in a state of fulfilling his right. You can't do this for everybody, and you can't do this in hospital nowadays all the time. They only want 2 people. When a Muslim, especially when an Asian Muslim is in hospital, you get like 50 people coming to visit, the whole khandan comes. And the nurses get really perturbed because with everybody else, they just about get one visitor if they're lucky. And with Indian, Pakistani people, mashallah, it's the whole, they go and stand guard down there, right? Alhamdulillah. But you can't do this with everybody. But this is obviously, the closer you are, then it's possible. You can't have everybody sleeping in the room, can you? Right? Or staying with them. But this refers to somebody who you're very close to. وَمِنْ حَقِّ الْأَخِ عَلَى الْأَخِ أَنْ يَصْدُقَهُ إِذَا انْتَصَبَ إِلَى أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْأَكَابِرِ مِنْ أَوْلِيَاءِ أَوْ عُلَمَاءِ أَوْ أُمَرَاءِ. This is a very kind of peculiar thing. I don't know how much of that we deal with here, but I guess people do. He's saying another right of one brother over the other is that you should believe him and accept if this brother of yours attributes himself to some great luminary of the past, some great individual of the past, like some big wali of Allah, or some big alim, or some amir, or some leader of the past. My great grandfather, ancestor was this big, would you call it, so and so in the Afghan, army or something like that. Whatever it is. There's a lot of people, they claim to be Faruqi, descendants of Umar Farooq radiallahu anhu, Siddiqi, Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. What's the other one? Alawi. They become Alvi, with a V. There's no V in Urdu. There's no V in Arabic, but they become Alvis. Where they get the V from, I don't know. Alawi, it's with the wow, right? So they become Alwis. And then what's the other one? Uthmanis. And of course Sayyids, Shurafa. And there's many other families. In the Arabs you have the Ghassans and the Qahtans and these other famous families. So if somebody claims to be from there, khalas, that's his problem. I mean, you don't have to give him anything for it, but just don't deny it either. Right? Don't deny it either. Leave it. Muhyiddin ibn Arabi mentions that if your brother attributes himself to any great luminary of the past, then beware of trying to discredit that attribution, even if you discredit in yourself. Because then what you're doing is, if there is a reality to it, you are entering between that and trying to sever it. And in Islam, ancestry, genealogy, right, is very important. That's why marriage is so important. And that's why things have to be halal and so on to get that from. If you come in between that, then you are disrupting this system. In fact, he says, وَرَدَ أَنَّ الطَّعْنَ فِي الْأَنْسَابِ كُفْرٌ. Discrediting or trying to question genealogy and a person's connections in that is a form of disbelief. I'm not sure where he gets that from, because he doesn't mention it's in a hadith. He says it's been related. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best where. However, to say to somebody that you are not such when they are such is a major sin. That much is proven. How is it a major sin? It's a major sin because you're accusing them of something they're not. An accusation of somebody of what they're not. You're accusing them and saying you're not this, whereas they are that. That's a major sin. A false accusation. The next point he brings up is وَمِنْ حَقِّ الْأَخِ عَلَى الْأَخِ أَلَّا يُكَفِّرَهُ بِذَنْبٍ وَلَوْ لَا النَّاسُ بِهِ إِذْ لَا تَخْفَى قِلَّةُ وَرَعِ النَّاسِ الْيَوْمِ فِي الْكَلَامِ وعسر معرفة جميع الألفاظ التي يكفر بها الإنسان والتكفير كما قال شيخ الإسلام السبكي أمر هائل أقل ما فيه أنه أخبر عن إنسان أنه خالد في النار لا تجري عليه أحكام الإسلام لا في حياته ولا بعد مماته. And this is another right of one brother over the other, is that you do not make takfir. You do not charge them with disbelief for any sin that they commit, even if people begin to believe that the person has committed it. You do not charge them unless it's a proof that they've done an act of disbelief. Why? He says clearly people are not very scrupulous these days in what they say. So be very careful when somebody says something. They've said something and you've charged them with disbelief. They may have made a mistake. Understand? They may have made a mistake. And it's very difficult, he says, to know exactly what kind of expressions, statements, and words become a word of disbelief. People, especially some people who have a lot of harshness in them, who like to give fatwas and they're not qualified. Right? You know, who goes around doing takfir of others? If you check online, most of those who are doing takfir of others are not scholars. Some unfortunately are, or they claim to be learned people, but most are not. They're just people who kind of are really hyped up about some movement that is a very takfiri style movement. They've got shiddat in them. Generally these people, you'll see by their nature, they are extremists, just by their nature. It just happens that they are in this particular group. If they were in another group, they'd be extremists in another sense. They are generally also people who came from a very bad background and another extremist background of taking drugs and all of these kind of things. And now they found this, so they take it to another extreme. They just have extreme mentality. Their whole psychology and their approach to the world is an extremist one. A lot of them, I can't speak to everybody, but a lot of them are like this. They're just extreme natured. So they just happen to be extreme natured in this case as well. So a lot of the expression of extremism that you see out there is based on a person's extreme nature and his fitrah, rather than he's just using whatever it is, the ideology or the group or whatever, he's just using that as an excuse to justify his extreme nature and to give vent to his extremism. That's essentially what it is. So he's saying, look, how can you do takfir of somebody? You have to give them the benefit. You don't even know what makes takfir and what doesn't. But you see what these people will say, that no, that's just a sin. You're talking about this guy. There's a person, subhanallah, I noticed that he doesn't make salam to me. I say salam alaikum, he can't stay silent. And then after that, I realized one day, he came and asked me about my aqeedah, about where Allah is. And then I had a big discussion with him and everything like that. And the problem with Salafis who are on this point, I don't like to quote the name of the groups generally, but this is a very kind of extreme Salafi thing. Alhamdulillah, a lot of Salafis have calmed down a lot, but there's still some, especially the new converts, they're the worst sometimes. Because they've got that shiddah with them anyway. I said they've got that extremism in them anyway. So they're just using it in this case. So the problem with Salafis is that you cannot argue with them. Because they just see the world in one particular way. They're not appreciative of the other opinion. They don't even want to listen to it. Because they just think everything else is wrong. It's just a very bad ideology to be in, because your world becomes very dark. Your world becomes very restricted despite its vastness. The deen becomes a liability despite the merciful nature of it. That's what happens in people who are like, that's why a lot of them dry out eventually and just lose it. So after a long discussion, I realized I'm not getting anywhere. So he says, now I understand I can't pray behind you. By that time I'd left imamat anyway. I'd left being the imam. I said, you got a problem because you're both masjids close to you. Both imams believe in the same ideology that I have. So then he knew he's cornered. He says, but I haven't heard them myself, so I can't, I'm still going to pray there. Allahu Akbar. Well, good for him, at least he's praying. But I know that he still does not make salam to me. He just comes with this face and just walks past. Allah help and assist all of us. Allah help and assist all of us. I was just trying to tell him, just open your mind to understand the other opinion. That's it. Just open your mind to just understand where the other people are coming from. You don't have to agree with it, but at least you will find in yourself the ability to understand why they think that way. So that at least the harshness that you feel towards them will be diminished. And at least there'll be unity that will be created in the Muslim community. Because this is what creates the most disunity. That's why our mujahideen in these countries cannot do anything because of this disunity. Afghanistan got messed up that way. Syria is getting messed up in the same way. It's the disunity that's creating them. This Taqfeeli attitude. This not appreciate. You don't have to agree with what somebody else says. But just listen to why they're saying what they say. That's the important thing. You know, like there's many cases where I'm convinced that I'm right. But you have to listen, and subhanallah, there have been many cases where you start to understand why somebody else is doing, and you sometimes understand that they've got a bit of truth to what they're saying, and you enrich yourself better. And that is very important. So nobody's telling you change your opinion, but at least appreciate. At least the venom will come out. At least you will no longer will be a venomous snake. So at least let's detoxify the situation. We can still get along. Continue praying the way you do, no problem. But at least we can detoxify the situation. So then he says that Shaykh al-Islam al-Subki, one of the great, he was the Shaykh al-Islam of his time, one of the great scholars, him and his son. Some great scholars at that time. So Shaykh al-Islam al-Subki, he says that takfir is amrun ha'il. It's a very dangerous thing to do. Very dangerous. He says, what's the minimum effect that takfir will have? What is the minimum effect of it? The minimum effect is, you are essentially saying to somebody who you think is kafir. I mean, you know, a lot of people who think they should do takfir, they think they should do it as a responsibility. Shari'i responsibility. Think they need to do it. Right? Now, what are they doing essentially? They are saying essentially, see, when you say you're a kafir, it doesn't seem to be a big deal because it's become so cheap. What does it mean? If I call somebody a kafir, what am I saying about them? I am saying that you are going to be in hell forever. I am saying you are in hell forever. You should not be treated as a believer in this world or in the hereafter. That's essentially what it means to do takfir of somebody. Now, doesn't that become a bit more serious? One is calling somebody kafir, big deal. You know, I don't think, those words even mean anything today, the way people use them. But when you say to somebody, you're going to be in hell forever, and you are not to be treated as a Muslim in this world and the next, now things start to become a bit more serious. When you say kafir, you're used to people who you think are kafir. You know, for the people in this mindset, he's used to people, kafirs, praying with them because he thinks the rest of the guys in the masjid are kafir. Right? There's some people like this, believe me. Or at least he thinks they may be kafir, he just hasn't heard them. It's a very bad situation. There's two extremists we've got. We've got some extremists who go to Makkah Mukarramah, Medina Munawwara, and do not pray behind the imams there, or have a doubt in their prayer behind the imams there because they are ultra Salafis. Well, because the imams are Salafis, and because these people are on the other side. So they have a miserable time in Medina Munawwara and Makkah Mukarramah. And there's another group of people who are, I don't know which one's worse really, because there's another group of people who cannot pray in the majority of mosques around the country because they're not their Salafi mosques or whatever mosques they are, you know, whatever other ideologies there are. Which one's worse? The one who goes to Makkah, Mukarramah, Medina Munawwara and feels out of water, feels that, is my prayer really valid or not? You know, praying behind the imams there? Or is it the one who has a problem praying in the majority of mosques in America or UK or India or Pakistan or anywhere in the world for that matter? Anywhere in the world for that matter. Which one's worse? That's an adab. That's punishment for your extremism. That you don't feel comfortable. And that's not how Islam is supposed to be. Because if you think that the majority of people are corrupt, kafir, corrupt, you know, you are the most corrupt of them. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said. You say people are fasted and corrupt, then you're the most corrupt of them. What are you? Why are you so special that you've got the truth? and nobody else, the majority, doesn't? You got the truth? How did you get it? And the majority didn't get it? Is that Allah's rahmah on the ummah? Allah loves this ummah. You think He's going to get the majority of them be kafirs and deviants the way you say they are? And how did you get chosen? You just became Muslim, got caught up in the wrong group, and they brainwashed you this way and gave you an exclusivist mentality. That's what it is. That's the reality of it. Again, I'm not saying you need to change your opinion, but at least appreciate the other person's opinion and tolerate it. And finally, on the Taqfeel issue, the Prophet ﷺ said, there's a hadith, Sahih hadith, "Man qala li akhihi kafir faqad ba'a biha ahaduhuma." When you call somebody a kafir, one of you is going to have to take ownership of that name, of that title, of that kufr. So if the person you're calling a kafir is a kafir according to Allah, then you're fine. It's like, imagine this, you've said, you are kafir. These words, they become like a bird or something, and they go towards that individual. If he is a kafir and they find their place, khalas, finish, you're out of it. They are kafir. If that person is not a kafir according to Allah, then those words come back. They go left, right, trying to find a place to settle. And if they don't find any kafirs to settle on, meaning the one you directed it to, it comes back to you. Now you may not be a kafir, but you get the sin of kufr because of that. That's why it's very dangerous. So I'd rather err on the side of caution. A lot of people used to, they say to you that, but why are you so restrained in giving? Why are you being so cautious about it for? It's better to be cautious, to be honest. The next point he says is أَلَّا يَبْغُضَ ذَاتَهُ إِذَا وَقَعَ فِي مَا لَا يَنْبَغِي. That if something unbecoming is done by your friend, somebody does something that is not completely decent, whether that be a major sin or a half sin or whatever it may be, then do not hate him as a person for that. Do not hate him as a human, as an insan. Because as an insan and as a human, he has great potential to change and so on. Hate his act. Essentially, that's what he's going to discuss in this one. He says, وَمِن كَلَامِ سَيِّدِ عَلِي الْخَوَاصِ رَحِمَهُ اللَّهِ. One of his sheikhs, Ali al-Khawas, his main sheikh, he says that he used to say, عَدَاوَتُنَا لِأَفْعَالِ مَنْ أَمَرَنَا الْحَقُّ تَعَالَى بِعَدَاوَتِهِ عَدَاوَةٌ شَرْعِيَّةٌ. Our antagonism towards the one who the Sharia has told us to be antagonist towards is a religious requirement. We read that before. To hate somebody for the sake of Allah, right? So our antagonism towards who Allah has told us to be antagonist towards, that's a Shar'i requirement. And our antagonism towards the person themselves as a human being committing that sin that they're committing, that is a natural demand. Most people will conflate the religious requirement of hating the act that a person does to hating the person themselves. Because this is how we naturally fare. We just want to lump the whole thing with the sin. And then he says, وَالسَّعَادَةُ فِي الشَّرْعِيَّةِ لَا فِي الطَّبْعِيَّةِ. Fortune and the right way is in fulfilling the Sharia, in just hating the act, not in fulfilling your emotions, not in following your emotions of also wanting to hate the person. Right? This is a very fine kind of, I hope you understand. وَالْغَالِبُ فِي النَّاسِ بُغْضُهُمْ لِذَاتِ مَنْ سَمِعُوا عَنْهُ أَنَّهُ وَقَعَ فِي مُحَرَّمٍ. It says most people, their tendency is to start hating the person who they hear has fallen into some kind of unlawful act. They start hating the person themselves as opposed to just the act. Most people do not make this distinction. Now, how many of us think when somebody does something wrong that that's his act, that he could become a better person? We don't think that way. We should be that discriminating. We should start thinking that in such a refined way. Then he says, he's talking about the nature of people. He says that if people hear that somebody has spoken about them bad, they've said something not very nice about them, people exaggerate in their hatred so much that فَإِنَّهُمْ يَكْرَهُونَ أَوْلَادَهُ فَضْلًا عَنْ ذَاتِهِ. They'll even start hating his children, forget him, not him only. If you hear that somebody's spoken bad about you, you'll start hating his children as well. I mean, we are totally unprofessional in that regard. وَيَحْتَقِرُونَهُ زِيَادَةً عَنْ. Then they will disdain him. And وَرُبَّمَا يَزْعَمُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَنَّهُ مُصِيبٌ فِي احْتِقَارِهِ لَهُ. People will think that they are justified to disdain him as well. And وَغَابَ عَنْهُ أَنَّ مِنَ الْجَهْلِ الْمَحْضِ احْتِقَارُ عَبْدٍ اِعْتَنَى بِهِ الْحَقُّ تَعَالَى. This statement is a very heavy statement. It takes a lot to understand it and appreciate it. Subhanallah, he's saying, it is lost on many people that it is absolute ignorance to disdain somebody who Allah is taking care of and who Allah brought out of non-existence into being. That is extremely deep. He's saying it is absolute ignorance that you don't recognize. He's saying it is absolute ignorance that you start disdaining somebody who Allah is taking care of. He's allowing to live in this world. Allah created this person, brought him out of nothing into being, and you are disdaining that being. That seems extreme. Like, what kind of rahmah did Sha'rani have to... Well, it was actually Shaykh Ali al-Khawas who said this. But when you learn this type of mercy towards others, that's when your life becomes easier in this world. Because then you'll have a merciful approach to people. And those people will be the most successful because they will be led by their compassion. Now, that's what we need to do. When we hear something bad about somebody, make a separation between the individual and the problem. فَاحْذَرْ يَا أَخِي مِنْ ذَلِكَ. He says, oh brother, beware of this. فَإِنَّ الْحَقَّ تَعَالَى مَا أَمَرَكَ أَن تَحْتَقِرْ أَحَدًا مِنْ خَلْقِهِ. Be very careful about this, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not command you to disdain and humiliate any one of His creation. وَإِنَّمَا أَمَرَكَ أَن تُنْكِرْ أَفْعَالَهُ الْمُخَالِفَةِ لِشَرْعِهِ لَا غَيْرٍ. The only thing Allah told you to tell you is to oppose the bad act and the sin that he's committing. Nothing more than that. فَتَأْمُرُ الْعَاصِي وَتَنْهَا. So go ahead. Command the disobedient person to do good. Prohibit him from evil. وَأَنْتَ غَيْرُ مُحْتَقِرٍ لَهُ. But all the time you must not disdain him. And then you will actually see that your advice to somebody will get much further, will reach much further, because you will do it with compassion for the person and for hatred of the act. It just makes a big difference. وَتَأَمَّلْ قَوْلَهُ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ فِي شَجَرَةِ الثُّومِ. And just think of, he said, just reflect over what the Prophet ﷺ said about the thum, garlic, the garlic plant. إِنَّهَا شَجَرَةٌ أَكْرَهُ رِيحَهَا. He said, it is a plant, I dislike its smell. He didn't say, most of us say, I hate garlic. When you don't like something, when you say, I hate garlic, well, who cares about your hatred? I hate garlic, they say. That's not what the Prophet ﷺ said. The Prophet ﷺ said, that plant, I don't like its smell. So he did not dislike its entity, its whole. He disliked its smell, which is just one of its characteristics. So from that we should understand that our enmity, hatred, antagonism to even a disbeliever is only that of a characteristic, and that characteristic is disbelief. Because the evidence for this is that if that same individual, human creation of Allah, becomes a believer and he becomes good in his belief, then we are not allowed to have any antagonism towards that person. This is very deep. This is just really kind of clarifies. You have to think over it. Allow this kind of thought process to take over our mind, inshallah. Then you'll see that we'll do much better. Your da'wah will go further. When you have that kind of, people who are out in khuruj and all that as well, same thing. A lot of the time, if we get into this mode that those guys don't come to the masjid, and we come to the masjid, you end up with a superiority complex and sometimes become worse than the person outside. Because the arrogance destroys us. We have to have a compassion for those people, how to bring them in for salat. And you see, if you have a compassion, you think about it this way, then you will see that your da'wah will be much more effective, inshallah. Inshallah, we stop here. We'll continue the next time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to understand this, to bring it into our life, and to improve our perspective, and to bring more mercy in ourselves. Wa akhiru da'wana an alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
The point of a lecture is to encourage people to act, to get further, an inspiration, an encouragement, persuasion. The next step is to actually start learning seriously, to read books, to take on a subject of Islam and to understand all the subjects of Islam, at least at their basic level, so that we can become more aware of what our deen wants from us. And that's why we started Rayyan courses, so that you can actually take organized lectures on demand whenever you have free time, especially, for example, the Islamic Essentials course that we have on there, the Islamic Essentials Certificate, which you take 20 short modules, and at the end of that, inshallah, you will have gotten the basics of most of the most important topics in Islam, and you'll feel a lot more confident. You don't have to leave lectures behind. You can continue to leave, to listen to lectures, but you need to have this more sustained study as well. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.